Hi, everyone. Good morning. Morning, mostly. Your mic good, Jay?
Check, 1, 2,
Check,
yep.
check. All right.
Yep, sounds good.
Great. Well, welcome to the second annual VulnCon. All right. There's probably at least two more, so we're looking good. Jay and I, we have half an hour. We're going to try to get through our stuff. If you have questions, we don't mind you raising your hand or asking during. We might, keep it short just to get through the material. So yeah, this is the minimum viable vulnerability enumeration. Thank goodness there's an easy acronym, MVVE. Oh, where's the thing? All right. So in the fall, we were in Utrecht.
Yep.
At a different awesome vulnerability related conference, even more narrowly nerdy than this one, Vuln Forecast TC. And this is a tunnel underneath a canal, near a canal. It was a beautifully decorated tunnel.
Yeah.
And there's Jay. I took a picture to just to remember the moment, not really knowing that, caring that Jay was there. But luckily, Jay was there, and I went up and said, "Hey, Jay, what if?" And then that's sort of where we talk a couple times a year, and that's where things got started here. So,
and so this is basically since this was what, in the fall?
Yeah, September, October, anyway.
So shortly after that, Art and I started setting up meetings to talk about this question. And we've been meeting quite often, and it's been one of the more enjoyable, long, extended discussions that I've had. It's been very fun.
Yeah, it has.
So the question that Art asked me, we were sitting there, says, what information do we need in a vulnerability record to uniquely identify a vulnerability? And both Art and I do a lot of work with CVE.org. And we were discussing this, trying to figure out what is the minimum that you would need? What is that core element? And there are a lot of databases popping up. We've got, OSV now, GitHub Security Advisories, ANISA is talking about one, JP CERT, the Chinese NVD. There's a lot of different databases. And what would the minimum core be that all of those should share? How do we define those? How do we talk about those?
So, and as we talked, we really focused on the absolute minimum. So keep that in mind as we go through things. And real quickly, just a aside, our interest in what are the minimum parts of a database turned out, that's what we started off with, but we had to sort of talk about why we want that information in the first place. So this got into a discussion about vulnerability management. And I don't think anyone here will be too surprised by this, but just a reminder, this is sort of risk management. Doesn't have to be a big, scary, multi-year effort with 30 people working on it, but right, you have a vulnerability. You really are effectively in the end trying to sort of manage your risk. We're not going to have zero vulnerabilities. There's going to be some number of them. We may not even fix them all the same way. We all have to deal with which ones do we do first, second, third, and that's a different question or different answer for different people, quite possibly.
Yep.
So Jay mentioned that there's a lot of databases and a lot of stuff. This is a slightly scientific and slightly artisanally crafted, very statistically valid though, word cloud, tag cloud of a bunch of, oh yeah, I mean, I grabbed, if you had a JSON schema and my JQ command worked, your words got in here. So this is the stuff we all deal with, right?
Just to clarify, I do a lot of data visualization, but Art created this. I just wanted to get that out there.
If you see an easy thing you could do on a website, I did it. If you see a complicated thing, it's probably from Jay. But yeah, we know this, right? There's a ton of stuff. And this is like 100 of the 400 words, right, that made the top cut or whatever. Do we need all these things? Do we use all of them? Do we care? Are they helping us? Do they cost a lot to obtain the information? And then is it giving us any benefit in the end? I don't know, but that's what we tried to look at here. Also a quick nod, we borrowed our title slightly from this seminal paper from 1999. I think CVE is now 26 years old. And I put this up here for one reason, credit where credit is due, but also this back in even the early days, what goes in the database was obviously a big question. And a lot of stuff in this paper is still valid. We might be doing some of it. We might not be doing some of it. Maybe we should be doing more of it. But if you haven't read this paper, it's pretty short. And if you're in CVE at all, it's certainly worth the read.
Yep. So let's talk about how we set up to define MVVE, that very easy acronym to say. So the first and very core element of MVVE is that it must contain unique and public identifier for each record. And we had a debate about the concept of a primary versus secondary type database. So if you're a primary like CVE.org, you're going to need a CVE ID. You need that public identifier. But if you're just there to enrich, if you're a secondary source, like EPSS always publishes the scores with a CVE ID, they don't have their own unique ID. They're a secondary source going to enrich some other primary unique ID. The second one must contain, this is a really key one, must contain enough information to initiate the vulnerability management process for the product consumer. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about terms and definitions and all those fun debates. Yeah, and so this, that's a key one for me, but you want to take?
Yeah, sure. So we practiced a lot, our handoffs. You'll be able to tell. Yeah. I need to disambiguate these things, right? I need to tell them apart. So there will always be sort of a conflict or a confusion here and there, but sufficiently unique, disambiguate, disentangle. Is it this vulnerability or that one or that one or that one? Even if you're doing somehow a perfect job of that, we all might disagree on what is a vulnerability and what is 3 vulnerabilities. So we didn't solve the definitional problem, but for the purposes of this, you've got to have enough information to tell things apart pretty reasonably and distinctly.
And just to expand on that, if you create a vulnerability record and all you have is an ID and a product producer has a product and they say, hey, this product here, we've got a CVE for it. We've got a vulnerability identified. Here it is, go fix it. Like the information that you could have in there would be rather minimal. And maybe you don't have to do this third one, right? Maybe you don't need to. If you just know, I got this product, I need to go fix it. Maybe you don't need to disambiguate from other vulnerabilities, in the same product, especially. But I think that this is a key one for us.
Yeah. Sort of the inverse of this is, our test is if I remove one of the elements, does the thing fall apart and no longer exist? So any removal of any one of the minimum elements means I fail, I don't have a record anymore, I can't do any of the stuff I needed to do.
Yep, minimum.
We'd like to be, is efficient the right word here? Not
sure.
Duplicate the storage, not have multiple copies of things.
Parsimonious.
Sure. The data science term, parsimonious. How many ways should a record represent what's affected or not affected? 3 or 4, we could do that, but one would be better, right? So do you mind if I keep this one? I think I fixed this one up last. So all right,
it's good.
We just started thinking, what are the minimum elements? That's all we wanted to talk about. Very quickly, we had to talk about everything else around them, which is fair. One day, I think I said to Jay, man, we're spending all our time stuck in these other parts of the problem. And I felt like we were doing a bad job. And Jay said, no, that shows that the information we're picking has to fulfill some need. It has to fit into something else. So fitting in is actually a pretty key part of our work here. So we really wanted information elements. We quickly realized we were trying to find out what they were for the purposes of doing vulnerability management. We decided we needed some phases of vulnerability management and a few stakeholder roles. Again, the focus is the information elements. We couldn't avoid some of the framing, and that's perfectly fine. The phases I felt are going to turn out to be kind of more important to our work.
Yeah.
The roles, we took a pretty light touch.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, and the phases are, like Art said, where we spend a lot of our time. And I would do this often when I was doing presentations talking about vulnerabilities. I would go Google vulnerability lifecycle and I would get the circle with arrows and maybe 5 things on there, discover, prioritize, remediate, monitor, report, stuff like that. And you get some slight variations. And that's where I started this project and obviously expanded a little bit. And it's not a circle. But basically, we define these things and there's not a lot of surprise here. And the key thing that I think is a pivot point is around 4, where we're putting stuff where the gap between public disclosure and public discovery. And that's really where we're going to focus a lot of our time. There's 2 other things that we added in here that were sort of discovered through our discussion. One is number 7, where essentially you may discover local instances. You may discover that you've got a product that is vulnerable, but then 7 says, hey, this one needs special configuration, or it needs this other thing installed, needs to be running on an ARM platform, or whatever it is. There's something like that, that local context is going to provide color. And I think as we get into the more and more prioritization becomes critical, that 7 is going to become a much bigger step. And then the other thing was step 9, where we talked about communication coordination. If you're in a small place and you're discovering and remediating, this doesn't exist. If you're in a large org, this is a very, very large challenge. Once you identify it and you prioritize it, now you have to actually go find who is responsible, and you have to communicate and coordinate that remediation effort.
Yeah, and this number 9 step is essentially at a larger org. If someone is sort of has a first, their day job is do the vol management, they may have to communicate and task other parts to do stuff. That's what it means, right?
Yep.
Also, question, sir.
To what
To
what extent is this an idealized timeline versus an actual one?
Exactly. Yes.
Bingo. Yeah. No. We could qualify it, I think.
Yes.
I'm not quantifying. Yeah. So this is idealized. And as Jay mentioned, you
Very
can
much
search
so.
the internet and you can find any number of these. We're not arguing too much about is ours right or wrong. We needed something to fit in our part and see how things.
And yeah, well, the next slide, actually. Thank you for that.
We're getting no more.
But yeah, I mean, this is the reason that this exists, is to evaluate information elements. If we say, hey, we really need this thing, we need to say we need this thing because of the tasks in phase 8, right? That's why we need to do it.
So in theory, all that information on that stupid word cloud should help you with one of these phases somewhere. That's kind of where things are coming in. Yes, this is idealized, and this linear, if you did actually 1 through 11, 0 through 11, this would maybe be the ideal sort of somebody finds something, they report it to a coordinator or the vendor directly. There's a nice private coordination period. The disclosure is all planned. So my term is risk minimizing defensive coordinated vulnerability disclosure is this idealized plot if you're on the side of defense.
Are you looking, Pete Aller asking a question here. Are you looking to make this standardized then?
I don't think
Because
so.
there's so many permutations, which I think are worthy of knowing what kind of permutation you can run into, but.
So to be clear, we looked first.
Right.
We found nothing that was a dead fit. We took some stuff we found and added, as Jay mentioned, 7 to 9 might be new, nodes or phases in the list. We're not here to debate or discuss or defend our choice of phases so much as we needed some framing in which to say MVVE goes here. So
Yeah.
happy to discuss the phases, but they're for the purposes of our work more than
A
we're going to
means
go
to an end.
standardize a new one. Right?
Yeah, they're a means to an end. Yeah.
So, and yes, when things don't go in order, right, you could just go from discovery right to finding it in the wild. I think I got the arrows all right. You can skip the part where it goes in a database and go straight to, I discover local compromised instances on my network and figure out I had an O day, and then we all love this fun, high stakes, painful, high stress arrangement. So just to say, you could draw some arrows and erase some of the nodes and you can get different disclosure patterns. There's a whole bunch of work on the sequencing that we didn't get into elsewhere in the world. So yeah.
We didn't get into yet.
Not yet.
Yeah. This is ongoing.
So this is just to put you back in the framing of our conceptual phases. And then.
And this is what we're talking about. We've got on the left side, we've got sort of the private, the coordinated vulnerability discovery is happening there. And then in the middle, you've got where it transitions from private to public and how does that occur? And this is where we wanted to focus. And as we were talking about this, we were thinking very much about product consumers and thinking about all the steps they had to do and the information they needed. But then we had this realization that it actually looks more like this. And I created this slide and I just got tired of putting logos on here. So if your logo's not in here, I apologize. There could have been, 4 or 5 more slides. But this is really what the reality is. You've got all of these people and organizations with their own motives and their own goals at stake, and they're going to speak up and say, "Hey, no, in that record, I want blah blah blah. I want that in there," you know. And so to just realize that there's a lot of forces, there's a lot of motivations and pulling and pushing and things like that.
And this also illustrates, right? If I'm a mature large organization, I might do my own vol management downstream, but I also probably hire somebody or pay someone else to help me do it. So whether you're a vendor of vol management or doing it in-house, that all works here. Oh, another tidbit: if you are a fully vertical, automatically patch all your software on your customers' machines without them even knowing it's happening, you know, software supplier vendor is doing all of that path for you, right? So
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to go fairly quickly through these. Actually, do you want to?
Yeah, I
This is your
think it's
stuff,
just
but I'll put it
good
up.
to call out that,
Yeah.
like the phases and tasks that we talked about, the roles, we started out way more detailed. I think we had, I don't know, we had like a full page full of all of these roles. And for the purpose of talking about what information elements we need, we reduced it down to these 4. Tried to keep it really, really simple. You've got some kind of a producer, right? Making a product, an open source developer, IoT developer, whatever it is. You're producing something. And then you've got the third thing here, or the second one, sorry, the consumer, they're consuming it. And for most of the time, they're also responsible for remediating. But as Art said, maybe the producer pushes it and forces that patch, something like that. But the consumer generally is the one responsible for patching. But they may often have help with a vulnerability manager, could be within that organization, could be outsourced, and these are all sort of players in the field. And this is what we reduced down the entire complexity of the last few slides into the roles. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of, yeah, but what if type things in here, but we wanted to keep it simple and just sort of talk about the producers and consumers and then the other folks.
Yeah, and like the phases, there are other lists of roles, and we're not arguing that ours is the best. So just for the purposes of the framing, really. So what are, we know we had a big word cloud earlier, but slightly better defined. These are some of the information elements that you might be familiar with in any of the records of your favorite vulnerability records.
And Art did the slides. If you're wondering about the build out and the clicking that we're doing, Art did the slides with the build out and the.
A colleague I respect told me I had to do it this way. So anyway, all right.
So yeah, this is the list that we tentatively came up with. Clearly there are things missing. I think for as many people in the room, we could probably add at least one per person, and level of details, but we wanted to keep it sort of high level. Like, for example, the product identifier. We didn't want to go into CPE versus SWID versus Perl versus Omnivore.
Who wants to fight about? That's a different talk, I think.
But the point is,
ID
all of those are going after a product identifier. And we would want to know that product identifier, whether we get there circular or direct or around something, it doesn't really matter. We need that product identifier.
Yeah, we're pretty CVE based, but there are multiple vulnerability identifiers. If they meet those requirements, then they identify a vulnerability. That's great. So again, this is not the entire list. And we did skip sort of, you want like dates on things, when it was published, maybe who wrote it, some of that stuff. We're sort of skipping the meta that maybe most good data sources would have, but we're not we're not paying a lot of attention to that, I don't think.
Well, I pay a ton of attention to that. I think a good data management is really key. As a big consumer of data, in our final paper, there's going to be a nice little section talking about stewardship of data.
Yeah, sorry, those things are very important. We're not focusing on it here, other than Jay insists on good data quality, right? Good architecture, good structure, storing things once. All right.
Yeah.
So the absolute minimum MVE.
The big reveal.
The big reveal. It's big, and you'll see, right? So we need to name the thing. We could spend easily half an hour, probably spend all day talking about names and identity and philosophy and reference and
referent.
There's some grammar referent. There's a lot of stuff on naming things. Turns out to be super hard and interesting in a computer science and philosophical sorts of ways. But you need to identify the thing, right? It's that buffer overflow floating in space that affects that software there. It might be there. We have an ID for this thing. You can have a name, you can have an easy name, you can have a heartbleed name, you can have a CVE, you can have an OSV, you can have a GUID. Humans will hate you, but you can have a GUID. Computers like those. Humans don't, right? The vulnerability floating in space is like a CWE with nothing to attach it to, right? I have a buffer overflow in what? We need the what. You have to have the what. We have to have a product, using the term very broadly, software of some kind, probably hardware people. You can have a bug in hardware, that's fine. System, there's a problem in a thing. This is the object. A vulnerability affects a product.
Yeah.
Question, Mr. Feng. Oh,
And so his question was, are we including the version? Yes. And I think that the product, we just said product identifier, but there, anyone who's looked at like when Microsoft lists out a vulnerability and the list of products and the way they define it is so detailed. It goes right down. You can click, 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 click. And there is a lot of stuff behind us saying product identifier, but you need, so as we're talking about referencing and when we talk about this, Art recommended a book to me about a philosophical discussion about naming things, which was actually a really interesting book. But what we want to do is have something that represents the actual product. As a consumer, we need to be able to look at this reference and be able to go to the thing in our environment and say, yes, these two match. This thing is talking about this exact thing. So you need version, you need build numbers, patch numbers, all of those things help you identify, is this in there?
I conceptually, I consider version is probably part of the identifier.
Yes.
I know there's somebody I debate with who thinks it shouldn't be, but there's an argument to be had either way. All that is identifying to me, even the date it was released on or something, right? So all of that stuff helps you identify the thing, then it counts as a name. There's a bunch of stuff missing, right? All of our favorite things, we have to go type in our scores and do all of our stuff. None of that's in the MVVE. I need to know what the thing is, and I have to have a sense of what it affects. That is the absolute bare minimum. So I feel pretty comfortable, with that. But it kind of leaves me feeling a little empty. Also.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we talked about, we wanted to identify the minimum. And these two things represent the minimum, because if we went back to the timeline, but it's like 40 clicks ago, if we went back to the timeline though, you would see that when we get that public discovery and we want to identify that local instance, if you can't do that step, if you can't do that one step, nothing else matters. If you can do that step, we're living in the age of the internet. You can Google a CVE ID. You can Google the vulnerability ID. You can look up that product, look for advisories. You can start to find things. The process will start. If you have these two fields, the process will start and it should get to completion. It'd be hard. You'd almost have nothing to prioritize on or to organize your vulnerabilities, but this is the minimum. This is the core of what you need to have everything else start and kick off and be enabled to execute.
Yeah. Without this, you're not doing anything else in vol management land, because you can't even find the thing, you don't know about the thing, right? Since I was left feeling empty, and perhaps Jay might have been also, we thought maybe there's a little bit extra MVVE plus, MVVE plus. What do we call we just want a little more information. So like a week ago, I think we came up with the adequate enumeration. Yeah. All right. Guess what it has in it? Our favorite two things already, because it has to have the MVVE in it. We think what to do about it. I don't know. Philosophically, this bugs me a little, but what you do about the thing seems important, Jay.
Yes. Yeah. If you think about it, like prioritization, it is required. I think in a modern society, like where we are, it's very much required. But like if you just identify that vulnerability, you've got the product identifier, and you know what to do about it, that can get you to the end.
Yeah.
Sloppily and very inefficiently, but you can get there.
Right. The other stuff is cool, but maybe it helps you in phases, but you don't need it.
Yeah.
At that key core level.
And to bring back to the idea of a primary versus enriching database, like there's a lot of stuff that can be enriched. If you create a record, you don't have to create everything. So in my opinion, a CVE does not have to be everything to everybody. It serves the purpose of being an identifier. And now we get things like NVIDIA that enriches it. We get other sources of enrichment that enriches things, and we're getting ADPs now that are enriching things. Or you can go to a vendor website and click on a CVE and get their enrichment of that vulnerability.
The other stuff might be helpful and important to you. It's just not in our absolute minimum list.
Yes.
Question, hopefully, sorry, quick here. Yes.
So
If you don't mind. Yeah.
you have your vulnerability ID, you have your product identifier. All right. So you've got your minimal viable. Well, why do I care? In other words, where's the summary or description of what it is? Is
Yeah.
that is the intention, like I need to go to that source to get that information?
In the absolute minimum sense, we're leaving that pretty open, right? So like, as Jay mentioned, it might be, I have the ID, I have to go track, worst case, I have to go track down that ID somewhere. Is my source the internet? Is it your favorite search engine? Do I have another database I know to look in? Do I believe the person who issued the ID that it really is that vulnerability or not? Those questions are a little bit left open, which is why, again, I felt it's a little bit unsatisfying to say that's all that you need.
Yeah.
But we're trying to be very technical about that, and that's it. So we leave that open to sort of further phases.
And another thing that we talked about is like, what is that vulnerability? Like, what is the CWE? What is it a denial of service? Things like that. Like a simple description, right? And from a defender standpoint, like maybe you don't care. Like you may not, like you don't have to care. All you know is you've got a vulnerable product, you remediate it, you're done. You don't even care, like, was it a SQL injection or was it this or was that? You don't care. Like, just go fix it.
I think a lot of us care.
Minimum.
You
Right.
don't necessarily have to.
Right.
We're
But at a minimum.
super
Yeah.
close on time.
Got
Sir.
2 minutes.
Yep. I'm going to jump ahead. Oh, Jerry.
You guys kind of skipped over that, right? Are you okay with like it just saying this affects everything version 50 and below? Are you?
The specificity of I'm repeating your question. So do we care about the specificity of the product identifier? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're low on time.
We're like out of time. Let me finish one more slide and then we can talk after Fang if that's okay. Sorry. We're going to skip this for the most part, but I'll put it up. This is almost a slightly different question, but if we're talking about sort of exposures and not only vulnerabilities, does that change the MVVE? We don't know, but we're looking at that in our further work. And yes, we started off writing a paper for this week. Over time, we just started to write slides for this week, and we pretty much accomplished that. So normal stuff there. There is a paper. Yeah. It's pretty decent. It's going to get better. We will share it.
Probably openly and then finish it.
Yeah. We will welcome some number of comments on it.
Yeah. We'll welcome good comments.
Zero.
We have those.
Zero is a number. So it's right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
These slides are clear. They're going to be published and all that. If you care to do the thing, you can get the slides there. It's just a Google slide deck. We'll be around for questions, but we should
vacate.
obey our time and everything. Right. Thank you all.
Thank you.